The moment the young developer laughed and called the old field just wasted land, something inside my chest tightened so suddenly I had to grip the edge of the folding chair to keep my hands from shaking. It wasn't a cruel laugh exactly. Not the kind meant to wound someone. It was casual. Careless. The laugh of a man who had never known what that patch of grass had once meant. But it echoed through the Scranton municipal meeting room like a foul ball striking an empty grandstand. The room itself was plain in that way most small-town meeting halls are. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The chairs were those gray metal folding ones that creak when people shift their weight. The walls had yellowed slightly with age, and the windows along the side showed only darkness outside. I had taken a seat in the back row. Quiet place. Easy to slip out unnoticed if I needed to. I suppose that's where men my age tend to sit these days. The developer stood near the front beside a projector screen showing bright computer images of what the land would soon become. Clean sidewalks. Glass storefronts. A coffee shop with outdoor seating. A pharmacy with a glowing sign. Progress, they called it. The field sat between two rows of brick houses off Jackson Street. Small homes with narrow yards and chain-link fences. It wasn't much to look at anymore. The bleachers were cracked. The backstop leaned slightly to one side. The paint on the dugout benches had long since peeled away. But I could still see it the way it used to be. Summer evenings. Dust hanging in the warm air. The low buzz of stadium lights flickering on one by one. Kids in oversized uniforms dragging their bats along the dirt. The developer clicked his remote and another image appeared on the screen. This plaza would bring jobs and new tax revenue, he said. Right now that space is underused. It's basically just an empty field. Then he chuckled lightly and said the line that made my chest tighten. Hard to believe anyone ever cared about that dusty little patch of grass. A few people in the room smiled politely. No one looked toward the back row. I lowered my eyes to the floor. The linoleum tiles had little specks in them, gray and white mixed together. I stared at those specks for a long time while the presentation continued. City council members nodded thoughtfully. A woman near the front scribbled notes. Someone coughed into their sleeve. The meeting had the quiet rhythm of something already decided. Outside, I could faintly hear a car pass along the street. The distant hum of tires on pavement. Funny what the mind does when it's trying to hold steady. Because as they talked about square footage and property value and traffic flow, my thoughts drifted somewhere else entirely. Back to the field. Back to the sound of the chain-link fence rattling when the wind moved through the neighborhood. Back to the smell of the infield dirt after a long game, that dry, chalky smell that clung to your clothes. Back to the way the stadium lights buzzed softly overhead like tired insects. 20 summers. That's how long I stood in that third base coaching box. 20 years of boys with grass stains on their knees and nervous excitement in their voices. 20 years of teaching kids how to square their shoulders, keep their eye on the ball, and shake hands after a loss. Not one person in that meeting room knew it. And truth be told, I hadn't come there expecting them to. I'd heard about the meeting from my neighbor Earl, who reads every notice printed in the local paper. They're talking about tearing down the old field, he told me over the phone one afternoon. He said it the same way people mention the weather. Just a fact passing through the air. I had sat quietly for a while after hanging up. Then I put on my coat and walked over that evening. I hadn't planned to speak. I just wanted to sit there once. Hear what they had to say. See how the decision unfolded. Sometimes that's all an old man really hopes for, to witness the moment something ends. Up front, one of the council members leaned toward the microphone. The field hasn't hosted organized games in years, he said. Maintenance costs have been difficult to justify. A few heads nodded again. Someone else spoke about revitalizing the neighborhood. Another person mentioned parking concerns. The words drifted around the room like slow-moving clouds. And I sat there remembering a different kind of evening. July heat hanging over the neighborhood. Kids arriving early to warm up. The crack of a bat echoing between the houses. Mothers sitting on those old wooden bleachers with paper cups of lemonade. Fathers leaning against the fence talking about work, about bills, about nothing in particular. You could smell grilled hot dogs from someone's backyard 2 streets over. The world felt smaller then. Simpler. Or maybe that's just the way memory edits things. Up front, the developer moved to another slide showing a bright rendering of the plaza entrance. Retail demand in this area has grown significantly, he said. This project would modernize the space. Modernize. That word hung in the room for a moment. I shifted slightly in my chair, and the metal legs scraped faintly against the floor. No one turned. Most of the people attending were younger folks. Homeowners who'd moved into the area in the last 10 or 15 years. To them the field probably did look like wasted space. A cracked diamond behind a leaning fence. Nothing more. I couldn't blame them for that. Time has a way of sanding down the stories attached to places until all that's left is the surface. Eventually the council chair cleared his throat. Before we move toward a vote, he said, are there any long-time residents who'd like to share thoughts about the field? The question floated through the room. For a moment, no one moved. People glanced around politely, the way you do when waiting to see if someone else will stand first. I stayed seated. My hands rested on my knees. I told myself the sensible thing was to remain quiet. After all, the decision wasn't really about the past. It was about the future of the town. And progress has its own momentum. Then a woman near the front turned slightly in her chair and looked toward the back rows. Anyone? She said gently. The room fell still. I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. My heart had begun beating a little faster than usual. I don't know exactly why I stood. Maybe it was the sound of that earlier laugh still echoing in my ears. Maybe it was the image of that dusty infield drifting through my mind. Or maybe it was something simpler. The feeling that if I walked out of that room without saying a single word, the field would vanish without anyone ever remembering what had happened there. So I pushed myself up slowly. My knees aren't what they used to be. The metal chair creaked as it folded slightly behind me. And for the first time that evening, a few people turned to look. There's a particular kind of silence that falls over a room when an old man stands up to speak. Not disrespectful. Just uncertain. Like people aren't quite sure what kind of story is about to arrive. I walked forward a few steps so my voice would carry. The council chair offered a polite nod. Yes, sir, he said. Go ahead. I looked around the room. Most of the faces were unfamiliar. Younger than the boys I used to coach had been when they first stepped onto that field. I cleared my throat once. My name's Walter, I said quietly. My voice sounded older than it felt inside my chest. I lived 2 streets over from that field for most of my life. I paused for a moment, not because I had forgotten what I wanted to say, but because a certain memory had surfaced so suddenly it nearly stole the words from my mouth. A summer evening. Stadium lights flickering overhead. A skinny boy standing at home plate gripping a bat like the whole world depended on it. I folded my hands together in front of me. I'm not here to argue about the plaza, I said. A few people shifted in their chairs. The developer relaxed slightly, thinking perhaps the old man in the back had simply come to share a polite farewell. And maybe in some ways that's exactly what it was. I just wanted to tell you about one night, I said softly. One night on that field a long time ago. The room leaned into the silence. And for the first time that evening, every person in that municipal meeting hall was listening. I remember the lights that night most clearly. They were never quite steady. Old fixtures mounted on tall metal poles, buzzing faintly as they warmed up. Every now and then one would flicker, like it was deciding whether the evening was worth the effort. But when they finally settled, that whole field would glow in this soft yellow haze. Dust floating in the air like tiny stars. It was late August. Championship night for the neighborhood league. Nothing official. Just 6 teams made up of kids from around the blocks, Jackson Street, Pine, and the little cluster of houses near the old rail yard. To those boys, though, it felt like the World Series. I had been coaching for maybe 8 years by then. Long enough to know the nervous energy that settles over kids before a big game. Long enough to recognize the look in their eyes when they realize people are watching. That night the bleachers were fuller than usual. Those old wooden boards had already started cracking by then, the paint peeling off in pale strips. When people shifted their weight you could hear the wood creak softly. Parents sat shoulder to shoulder with paper cups of lemonade and plastic bags of peanuts. Someone had brought a small radio and set it on the bench near the dugout. It hummed quietly with a country station between innings. Beyond the outfield fence you could see the tops of the brick houses. Porch lights glowing. Curtains shifting now and then when someone inside peeked out to watch. The smell of the infield dirt was strong that night. Dry, dusty earth that had been raked smooth an hour before the first pitch. I used to love that smell. Still do. There was a boy on our team named Daniel. Skinny kid. Quiet. The kind who always stood a little behind the others when the team gathered around. He had this nervous habit of tugging at the brim of his cap whenever someone spoke to him. Good glove at second base. Quick hands. But when it came time to bat, something in him tightened up. Some kids swing like they were born holding a bat. Daniel swung like he was asking permission. That season he'd struck out more times than I could count. But he kept showing up. That's the thing about certain kids. They don't shine right away, but they carry this stubborn little flame of determination that refuses to go out. Anyway, the game was close. Last inning. 2 outs. Tie score. You could feel the tension settle over the field like a blanket. The stadium lights buzzed overhead. A warm breeze rattled the chain-link fence behind the dugout. Somewhere down the block a car passed slowly along the street. Daniel was due up. I remember seeing the way his shoulders tightened as he walked toward the plate. He glanced at me once. Just for a second. Not asking for advice exactly. More like checking whether the ground beneath his feet was still solid. I stepped out of the third base coaching box and met him halfway. Just breathe, I told him. His hands were trembling slightly around the bat. They're all watching, he whispered. I followed his eyes. And sure enough, those cracked bleachers were packed. Parents leaning forward. Kids from the neighborhood standing along the fence. Even a few people watching from their porches across the street. To a boy his age, that must have felt like the entire world. I leaned down a little so he could hear me clearly. Daniel, I said, no one's here to see you be perfect. He blinked. They're here to see you try. He stood there quietly for a moment. Then he nodded once and walked to the plate. The pitcher wound up. First pitch. Strike. The crowd murmured. Daniel stepped back, tugged his cap down, and reset his stance. Second pitch. Ball. Dust kicked up where it landed. From the dugout, his teammates were whispering encouragement. Come on, Danny. You got it. The third pitch came in fast. Daniel swung late and missed. Strike 2. You could almost hear his confidence cracking. He stepped out of the batter's box and looked toward me again. Not panicked. Just small. I remember placing my hands on my hips and smiling. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to remind him that the game was still simple. Ball. Bat. Swing. The pitcher took his time with the next pitch. A long pause. Wind moving gently through the chain-link fence. The lights buzzing overhead. Then the ball came. Daniel swung. And for a split second the whole world seemed to hold its breath. The crack of the bat was sharp and clean. That sound. If you've spent enough time around baseball, you know it instantly. The ball shot past the pitcher in a straight bright line toward center field. The outfielder took 2 steps back, but the ball was already dropping behind him. Kids exploded out of the dugout. Parents jumped from the bleachers. Daniel stood frozen at first base, wide-eyed, like he couldn't believe what had just happened. I had to wave both arms and shout for him to keep running. He rounded second with this stunned grin spreading across his face. By the time he reached third, the entire team was yelling so loudly the houses along Jackson Street must have heard it. He slid into home plate in a cloud of dust. Safe. Game over. For a moment no one moved. Then those boys swarmed him like he'd just hit the winning run in the World Series. Helmets flying. Gloves slapping his back. Daniel stood there in the middle of it all with that shy smile he always wore, only now there was something different in his eyes. Something steadier. Something stronger. I paused in the meeting room and looked around. The fluorescent lights hummed above us just like those old stadium lights used to. Most of the people in the chairs were leaning forward now. Even the developer had lowered his notes. I ran into Daniel about 15 years later, I continued quietly. He was working at the hardware store on Linden. A few people shifted slightly, still listening. He told me that night on the field was the first time he ever believed he might actually be good at something. I folded my hands again. Confidence has funny roots sometimes. No one spoke. Outside the meeting hall, another car passed slowly down the street. "I'm sure that shopping plaza will be useful," I said after a moment. "And the town probably needs it." A few council members nodded carefully. "But that field," I paused. "Well." I looked down briefly at the floor tiles again. For a lot of boys, that wasn't just land. Silence filled the room. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that arrives when people are quietly rearranging their understanding of something. I gave a small nod toward the council table. That's all I wanted to say. Then I stepped back. No applause. None expected. I returned to my seat in the back row and folded the metal chair open again. The council chair cleared his throat gently before continuing with the meeting. The vote happened about 10 minutes later. The plaza was approved. And you know something? That didn't feel like the loss I had once imagined. Because as the room slowly emptied, a few people paused on their way out. A younger woman stopped beside my chair. "My son plays Little League," she said softly. "Thank you for telling that story." A man in a work jacket nodded respectfully as he passed. Even the developer hesitated for a moment near the door. "Sounds like it was a special place," he said. I simply smiled. Later that night I walked past the field on my way home. The chain-link fence rattled gently in the wind. The bleachers were dark. Weeds had started creeping along the base paths. But if you stood still long enough, you could almost hear echoes there. The pop of a glove. The crack of a bat. A boy laughing as he ran the bases under flickering lights. Places like that don't disappear the moment the dirt gets paved over. They live on quietly in the people who grew up there. In the confidence they carried forward. In the lessons about effort and patience and shaking hands after the game ends. And that's something no shopping plaza can ever quite replace. These days, when I drive past that corner, I see the glass storefronts and the bright parking lot lights. People carrying shopping bags. Cars pulling in and out. It's a good, useful place. But every now and then, usually when the evening sun hits the pavement just right, I swear I can still picture a skinny boy standing at home plate. Hands trembling. Eyes full of doubt. Waiting for the pitch that will change how he sees himself. And I suppose that's the quiet truth about a life like mine. You spend years thinking you were just filling up empty evenings. Just tossing baseballs and giving small bits of advice to nervous kids. Then one day you realize those moments took root somewhere deep inside people. Not loudly. Not in ways that earn headlines or monuments. Just quietly. Like a line drive disappearing into the summer dusk while the lights buzz softly overhead.